Welcome to The Recurring Plot, presented by Curb and Turf. On this show, we interview agritourism farmers, authors, leaders, and influencers who share their insights on growing and monetizing your agritourism business. Here's your host, Dustin Reed.
Hi, welcome to The Recurring Plot, a show that talks about all things RVs and how to earn recurring passive income from your property. Today, we have a special guest joining us. His name is Norm Spivey. Norm is a retired Army veteran, author, a rental property investor, and a business owner. Norm's expertise is creating passive income with land and property that makes him a perfect guest to discuss the financial truths and strategies that can help you and all of us achieve our financial goals. So let's dive in and learn from Norm's experiences and the insights that he has to build wealth and generate passive income. So thanks for joining us today, Norm.
Thank you, Dustin, for the opportunity.
We're excited to have you. I want to first and foremost thank you for your service. I have family members that also serve in different branches of military service. So I just want to give you my thankfulness for your service and everything that you do. Can you talk a little bit about that? How did you get into the service, or what's the story behind you going into the Army?
So, like a lot of folks, grew up in rural Middle Tennessee on a farm, and knew I needed to go to college, but was the first person in my family to actually be able to get admitted, and was moved out when I was 18, was working a job and trying to go to school, and really kind of lacked direction and purpose. And the Army ROTC recruiter in our college student union there got a hold of me, and I probably looked like a prime candidate there. And one thing led to another. Next thing you know, I was in Army ROTC, and thankfully I was able to get a scholarship. So it helped. First and foremost, it was a means to pay for school, but then it obviously it became so much more than that. Just really a profession like none other, changed me in every way imaginable. But I spent 24 wonderful years serving as an Army Air Defense Artillery officer, and loved every minute of it, miss it. But it's been 4 years removed now, and on to bigger things.
Yeah. And because I think that's something maybe, and you can maybe speak on this, because I've had family members that had a hard time transitioning from being whatever branch service that they're in and then just going back to civilian life. How was that transition for you, and I know everyone's different on how they served and how they come out retiring and everything else. How was that for you, and what were some of the hurdles that you faced when you retired from the Army?
I really appreciate that question, Dustin. That it is a service in the military is such a consuming profession. It does take some time to transition back to a civilian, and that's the biggest thing you got to realize is, hey, but the minute you put on a uniform, you're going to have to take it off sooner or later. We came into the military as civilians, and you're gonna leave and go be a civilian again. But that's easier said than done. And some of the challenges, and I'll quick shameless plug. And I still consider myself a transitioning soldier from the Army, even though it's been 4 years, and I'm pretty much back to full time being a civilian. But I wrote a book about it. It's actually available on Amazon, Military Retirement and AAR, where I just captured over about 100 pages of just from making the decision to get out, to finding a job, to dealing with the VA and all those things. It's a lot. And again, and some veterans struggle with it. And I would just hope that any veteran that was really having some challenges would get some help, and you can find so many folks to talk to.
That's a great thing that you've done, is just kind of talking about that with your book, I'm sure, where you're speaking to those people that especially that transition, and finding the tools that they could help them.
Actually, the book is available for free from my website, normspivey.com, on ebook. And I found that it's one thing I've learned about writing. Surprisingly, folks still like paperbacks. I figured ebooks were the thing nowadays, but paperbacks are still popular. So ebooks free on my website, and then if you want a paperback, it's on Amazon. So.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and make sure we plug that as well. We'll put that in the show notes wherever people are watching or listening to the podcast. And not only that, you also have other other books. I think you have, is it 4 books that you've authored?
That's correct. Two kind of main works, and then two are more just for me, if you will, both kind of military
Mhm.
lifestyle focused. So
Yeah, because I was looking at that on your website, and it seemed like, and it was really cool because I even saw you on another podcast. It was a military one though, and so I kind of was I believe I was watching you on that. So I really love that you found. It seems like you found this passion in writing. And how's that come about?
well, it's funny you mentioned. I just blogged about it, and I've always enjoyed writing. I did pretty good at English in high school. A fun fact: I took the AP exam. I think it was the only one my school offered in CLEP. So I never took an English class in college, and maybe it shows in my writing. I don't know, but I did enjoy it. And then surprisingly, in the military, and that's actually one of my books, is it's called Writing to Lead.
Mhm.
And a lot of people may not know, in my 24-year career, I spent about 4 years just in a straight academic environment. And the military, and that was just the Army. Other services may even put more emphasis on research, on writing, expressing in what we call written communications, very
Mhm.
clear and concise. So I did kind of learn to write in the military style. So when I got out of the military, really what I see writing as, it's just therapeutic for me. It's a way to kind of just be introspective and reflect on where I've been, where I want to go, and the added bonus is, if some of my experiences could help someone, then what a great sense of personal satisfaction. And then lastly, hopefully someday my kids or their kids would see come across one of these books or the blog or something and say, wow, look at what granddad's talking about. He's crazy or something. I don't know, but
I mean, we definitely seen times have changed, right? As far as especially the society has changed quite a bit from, I guess, what a lot of people are used to. And you just been retired for 4 years, right? So how did you make that transition from having a successful military career to becoming and being an investor in rental properties?
So it actually happened kind of simultaneously. So we bought our first rental property in 2008 while I was on active duty. I was stationed at, I think it's called Fort Cavazos now. It used to be Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas. And the wife and I, we saved up our money, about 25% for a down payment, and bought a little duplex. And we lived in one side and rented out the other. And the cool thing about that, the way military pay is structured, you get a housing allowance, right? So when you're collecting rent on one side of the duplex, you pocket your what's called BAH, or allowance for housing. Well, it doesn't take long till you guess what? You've got a 25% to buy another duplex. So in the course of a 3-year assignment there in Killeen, Texas, we purchased 3 duplexes. And that took some sacrifice. The kids were toddlers, and we were in about 1,200 square feet, and it was a little bit cramped, but we still own those properties out in Killeen, and they're doing well. And just that's how we got started. And then later on, I actually acquired most of our rental properties while I was on active duty. My final assignment was at Redstone Arsenal, and it just so happened, and that's in northern Alabama, if you're not familiar with the location. And it was just a great market at the time. We were able to get some great deals on multifamily and some single family properties, and it just kind of snowballed really over the years.
So that was in 2008. So that was wasn't that when the housing crisis was? So was that like during the crisis, like, or is it like right after, or what's the
It
timeline like for that?
it was right after, and funny you should mention it. I think our first the first home, and this was when we were living in a duplex. I mean, I mentioned we had to put 25% down. The bank, and no offense to any bankers out there, but they kind of talk to you like you were a criminal or something. How dare you ask for money? And I think my interest rate was like 5.8 or something. And that was just a few years ago. And now we're all in kind of shock about current interest rates. But we've been there before, and not too long ago, if you think about it, just
Right.
about 15 years. So, but yeah, obviously we certainly refinanced that property once rates dropped. And but yeah, it was a little bit, those first couple of properties, there was no, you had to have 25% down, and you better put your best foot forward with the bank to get the loan.
So obviously you're refinancing, but you're also having a risk of your property value goes up with that. So what's kind of the trade-off of, I mean, obviously you're locking in a lower rate, you're going to be paying less interest over time. So can you walk through some of the benefits of doing that versus going through the refi, and kind of explain the benefits of doing that?
Sure, and I've actually blogged about it on several occasions. One thing I always say, life's a math problem. You got to make the math work, and really refinance. That's what it's all about. How long are you going to hold the investment? Generally, if you're not getting a point or two, if you're not able to refi for more than a point and a half, or preferably about 2 points, it's probably not worth your time.
Mm.
But you're going to have a break even point where the cost of the refinance, and what I like is about 3 years. If you can break even in about 3 years, absorbing those costs of the refinance, those are just some of the metrics that I use. But definitely, you got to watch we've refinanced 5 or 6 of our loans. I mean,
Mm.
it's just something you got to watch and do the math, get out the pencil, and for long-term investment, I think it's a key part of keeping the passive income stream
Yep.
going and viable.
And what are, I mean, obviously you're doing it sounds like you're doing multifamily units, duplexes. Are you doing apartments at all, or is it mainly like duplexes, or plexes that you're doing?
Yeah, no, we've looked and made offers, but we've never closed on any three or triplexes or quadplexes. I think probably most people know if you get over 4 units, 5 or more units, then you are getting into an apartment type complex. You've usually got to get the business financing or something to that effect. And we just formed our LLC back in 2016. So initially, these were all just personal, conventional loans as an investment. We do have a couple of small condo units, not beachfront or resort or anything, but here in northern Alabama that do very well. But duplexes, I got to be honest, and I'm probably biased. I just think they're for again, when you do all the math, the expenses, usually you can get a little higher rent because they might be bigger, 3 bedroom, 2 bath of that nature. Some of ours have a garage, and I just think duplexes are the most bang for the buck.
Right. And I'm sure, because obviously when you're having renters, you have risks involved with that. You're going to have additional costs like upkeep and stuff like that. What are the risks when doing these type of investments when you have multifamily dwellings and stuff like that? What are some of the downsides of investing in this?
Well, I've written at length about rental property investing. It's a people business.
Mm-hmm.
And also we're throwing this term around here, and we all do it. We're calling it passive income. But that's what the IRS calls it. I got that, but it's anything but. If you're going to own and manage your own properties, it's a bona fide side hustle. Because plumbing don't break on a Tuesday afternoon. It's Saturday night or Sunday night, whatever. And so those are the risk is really, I'd say, the number one risk, and this is if you're managing your own property. Now we still hold our properties in Texas. We've had a relationship with a wonderful property management company, but they're going to take their cut, which
Right.
we've been with them for several years, so we get a pretty good rate. But nowadays, if you're just starting a relationship, it could be a pretty substantial cut. But what's your time worth? So the risk, to long way of answering your question, to me, it's time. If you really want passive income, you're going to have to pay for it, hand over running the activity to a property manager, and pay that property manager for it. But if you do it yourself, it's a side business. Make no
Right.
mistake.
Right. Because it sounds like it's something that it could be, like you're saying, it's definitely, you want to make sure your renter, your tenants and everything else, you have that relationships, because I've heard some scary situations. I hope that hasn't happened with you or anything like that, or I'm sure that happens from time to time. But how long typically do you have your tenants for?
That's a great question, and that definitely is part of the calculus that figures into the math when you're looking at a rental, because tenant turnover costs money. I mean, every time you're going to have to do some level of work on the property to get it back up to standard to re-rent it. That's why long-term tenants are like gold. And one thing we've seen It's kind of funny. It's everybody knows nationwide rents have just increased dramatically. So we have some long-term tenants that we had kind of before the big spike in rental income and really COVID and a lot of things. And we made the conscious decision as a business practice, as a business value, we weren't going to gouge and just raise the rent dramatically, even if that's what market rent is. So some of our units we rent at below market to folks that have been
Wow.
there 4 or 5 years. And to me, again, it's the cost benefit there of if you alienate them and they go find a different place, then you're going to have to spend a few $1,000s to reset the property. And so it's just all part of and you've got to think about those things kind of before you get into it. You've got to establish, okay, these are my business principles, my business values,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna do modest rent increases. I'm not gonna jack rent up by $300 a month just because I know I can get it. I'm gonna bump it $50 upon lease re-signing, and those are just it's a people business.
Right.
It's a chapter in one of my or a portion of one of my books, and definitely you've got to take all that. And to your point about kind of the nightmare stories, you can find some of my work online. I've had a few of those, and just being from the army, it's not real hard to surprise me, but I still get surprised. You just never know.
Yeah. I have a close friend that he does a lot of this. He actually does apartment buildings, which he does very well because we're in Idaho, and so I'm sure in Texas you kind of gotten the same thing with your properties in Texas, where you're getting the California the California rush kind of going to those states, or people moving from even from people from New York going to Florida, people from California going to moving east, whether it's Arizona, Texas, Idaho, Montana. How has that affected your business, your values, right?
Yeah.
So what were I mean, you kind of mentioned that in your book. You even have five. I think you in one of your books you have five financial truths. Is that right?
That that's correct. So the full title of the book, and it was kind of my first effort to say, hey, we've been very fortunate. Maybe we're more lucky than good, but I want to share. I want to just how this average by every definition of the word, average American person was able to just be successful. And it's not rags to riches. I'm not trying to portray that,
Right.
but wanted to identify the five truths that I followed or applied in my life. And the actual title of the book is Millionaire on a Worker's Budget: Five Financial Truths to Build Wealth. And so, in addition to the truths, there's like 27 tips that kind of enable you to live the truths. And there's also, I call it a notional subject that we follow over the course of 25 years with kind of modest incomes. And but hey, they get enough money for their first house, and guess what? They don't buy a nice little brick home. They buy a duplex and they live in one side of it. And hey, and that enabled this and that and the other, and they got some education and some certifications, and next thing you know, in 20 years or so, they built over $1 million net worth. So, and I show the math on all that, so it's not just conjecture, but I really first and foremost, eh, to build wealth on a worker's budget, you've got to invest early and often. I started at age 23 when I got out of college, and I was about 5 years too late, in my opinion. But you've got to be a super saver. And then the second one is being frugal. I'm actually working on a book right now just about living a frugal life. I call it, you got to avoid that champagne taste on a beer budget. And so being frugal, it's been a big part of my life. And it doesn't mean being cheap or
Right.
not getting what you need, but just recognizing value. The third is collect rent, don't pay it, which kind of spun off into its own
Mhm.
book. And obviously, I'm a big fan of real estate. I just feel like if you look around at wealthy people or successful people, generally, usually they're not paying rent their whole lives. They own property, be it acreage, be it apartments or houses or whatever. They own property. So, and then the last two, be diligent. It's more than just working an extra shift. It's never walk past a wrong. If you see those shingles on the roof flapping, don't wait till it starts leaking and tears up the drywall in the ceiling. Call a roofer immediately.
Mhm.
And just diligence is important to building wealth. And then the last, knowledge is money. And we all think, yeah, you got to have some sort of certification or licensure or a degree or whatever. And I do believe that's true. You got to. or you need it. It helps. Let me just say that. But it's also, in my experience, it's hard to build wealth if you're not a do-it-yourselfer, and if you're paying somebody to do things for you. And we're not all mechanically inclined. I know I'm not, but what we've got YouTube, and you can figure out how to replace that faucet or fix the innards of a toilet tank, and those are all just really simple jobs that if you call a plumber is going to be $150. Do it yourself, it's 10, and you build wealth. In a way, it's other passive income streams by consolidating and doing it yourself. So those are the five truths I've reflected. Yeah, they still hold true. I published this book about 3 years ago, and yep, I stand by my guns.
Yeah, a lot of things are sentiments that I've heard, those diehard truths, right? Where you're being frugal. I remember the show. It was because when you mentioned the champagne dreams or no,
Beer, champagne taste on a beer
yeah,
budget.
yes.
Yeah.
How can our listener, if they're kind of late in the game, let's just say maybe they're in their 30s or 40s, and they're kind of on a shortened timetable, is there something that you would suggest to them to kind of get ahead, even though they're behind the eight ball? Because even when you're talking about that, on your experience, when you're already in your 20s and you felt that was too late, and maybe someone's already in their 30s or 40s and they're way behind the eight ball, right?
Yeah. Well, so you touched on it. I think what we called it in the military was tactical patience, and I alluded to it earlier, and it's funny you talk about the 30s. So again, and to be fair, I was in the military. I was overseas, bouncing around a lot, so it's kind of hard to buy a home. But to review the bidding, I was 35 in
Mhm.
2008, and my wife was almost 38, and that was our first home, a duplex.
Mm.
So I wished I could have done that 6, 7, 8 years earlier, but it worked out fine in my
Right.
mid 30s. And I think that's, and I think you said it, you definitely touched on it, that in our society, it's this instant gratification where we graduate college, we find a partner, and we get the first home we can afford. Well, maybe we need to rent. I've paid a lot of rent. Who knows? I may be paying rent again, even though I believe firmly collect rent, don't pay it. We all got to pay rent sometimes, and
Mhm.
save up that capital and make that first home. Maybe buy an apartment complex and live in one of the units for 4 or 5 years, and then go buy your dream home. And that requires some self deprivation, and it's easier said than done. But
Right.
that's really on the average Joe or Jane's salary. I just think that's the reality of it. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yep, I agree. I think you have to have patience, right? It's just one of those things where you're gonna learn to adjust depending on your life circumstances and depending on where you are in your stage of life. There's some people that are just not ready to make that commitment just because whether they're in college or maybe they take some sacrifice, like you're saying. Like that's similar to what my friend did. He bought an apartment complex. It was I think it was like, I can't remember. It was like, might have been an eightplex or something, where he was renting one of those rooms, or one of those apartments, and so he did that for I think 3 or 4 years, and then he was on site, so then he was able to oversee everything, and so those are kind of the type of sacrifices that you kind of have to make when and he made really really good. He makes really good money, obviously, and
Hmm.
so and that's one of the things I've kind of learned from him and other people like you as well, which is great. And because it is a long game. So drawing from your experience, what's some key insights that our listeners can implement to grow or monetize their own property, or generate their own income from their land?
So up front, I want to just put out there, I am not by any means an agritourism expert, and don't have a lot of experience or
Right.
really knowledge about the agritourism area. But I did grow up on a farm, and
Mhm.
it's funny what that farm, when eventually the family had to sell it and move on, but just the growth and value of the land. But the biggest thing, I've always loved the two for one, or so I think for me, and this is showing my bias towards rental properties, if you could take 2 or 3 acres of land if you have that's suitable to build either some sort of multifamily structure, or maybe like a bed and breakfast, or even stables. You could even have a livestock boarding, and monetize it in that matter to help support the agricultural operations or livestock operations on the rest of the property, and kind of complement it. I think you could have the Airbnb. There's just such a desire, I think, nowadays to get away from it all. And if you've got a nice little parcel of land that you could develop, that's what I do. And I know that's probably sacrilege for a lot of farmers, and to have a bunch of bulldozers coming in and pouring concrete, building some sort of structure on their land. But I do believe it could complement the
Mhm.
agritourism business.
I love that idea of just making it into a structure, or having stable, or using it as something that will benefit the landowner or the property owner, just because that's something on this podcast, that's one of our messages, is just making sure that people understand that they could have additional income or passive incomes in which they're able to have multiple ways to generate income. And I guess this is kind of a plug for what we do as well, because that's something we want to make sure that a lot of landowners or property owners have, is that you could utilize that, your the very thing that you have. And so there's tons of RVers out there, and there's not enough places for them to go. So that's one of the reasons why we have our platform called Curb and Turf, where if there's just so many RVers looking for places to go, there's literally like 500,000 of these RVs being produced, and just not enough campsites. There's like 18,000 campsites. And so there's an inherent problem within the RV industry. And so there's a huge need for RVers to go to these destinations. And a lot of RVers love kind of having those experiences, whether it's being on land, being on a farm, and having that experience, like you're saying, kind of getting out of the city, or and having experiences. So that's something that any property owner can do, is go to our website. If you go to www.curbandturf.com, we have information there on how you could offer up part of your driveway or a section of your property and have people on there, and you charge however you feel is the appropriate amount. And so that's another cool thing that we offer. How have you known to go from to acquiring another property? What's kind of the things that you look for to looking for those investments?
Well, again, I use capitalization rate, and you ask 10 different investors, how do you figure cap rate? And you'd get 10 different answers.
Right.
I've got a way that I figure it. I share it in my book, but essentially it's just the net income relative to the purchase price reflected as a percentage. So roughly about a 10% cap rate would be perfect, in my opinion. If you're willing to accept risk and you get down to a 7% or 8%, that's fine too. But again, it's a math problem. So in real estate, though, I will back up. What is the number one rule of real estate? Location, location,
Right.
location. Yeah, that is a truth. It's definitely in my book. In the rental property business, if you're looking at the dilapidated little home from the 20s in the rough part of town, sure, there may be a revitalization in 10, 20 years. There may not be. You've got to really think about location, and then work the math. The last thing I would say is maybe your financing. You've got to keep, and this kind of ties into the financial truce. As long as you're frugal and you're saving and you're diligent, you're paying your bills on time, and those things. You got to have your financing. It's not always a business loan or a loan from the bank. There's creative opportunities out there. I'll share this. I have bought one of our little condos here, and they were just going for amazing prices when we first got here in 2015. I've paid for a majority of one with a credit card loan. You get the 0% for 18 months, and so what you do is you just, all the other properties, any of the profit from that, I paid it off in
Mhm.
18 months. I don't know, probably restrictions on what you're supposed to use those things on, but that was a way to get some capital at 0%. Part of our business model, how we could do that, is we didn't start really taking owner draws until I retired from the military. So
Mhm.
everything we made from our rental property investments, we just invested back into the business. So it really snowballs very quickly. And that takes some discipline, because, hey, When you've got one property and let's say you net $300 a month, it's like $300, all this work. But then when you get 10, you're looking at, hey, that's $5,000 a month or 3,000 or 4,000, whatever the margin may be there. And to not touch that, but it'll compound very quickly. And then, hey, go buy some more properties or go in a different business venture, maybe into agritourism.
Right.
So
that's really good, just because, and that is creative, just because you're going off, especially on the credit cards where it's the 0%, you're utilizing that interest rate, and then you're mitigating those risks and offering more capital just because you're not having to pay the interest. I never heard that. I mean, that's really cool. I mean, because you do have to be creative, and I've heard a lot of that, just having that creative financing or thinking of different ways to finance, but not putting yourself at risk, right? Just because that's the whole point of it. It's just you don't want to put yourself in unnecessary risk, just because then it's just like house of cards and it comes tumbling down.
Well, that's the caveat and just the disclaimer there. And I threw that out as kind of maybe an extreme method of creative financing, but it does take incredible discipline because you got this, okay, 18 months, let's say you can get $20,000, 0% for 18 months. Great. Why not? You've got to pay that off in 18 months. Otherwise you're going to get killed and on interest, and it's going to could potentially suck you down into a place you don't want to be. So we got to know ourselves that, yes, I've got the discipline to pay this off. And
so kind of explain that with, I guess, your relationship with your wife. How is she involved in some of these?
So I guess she's the CEO and I'm the maintenance guy. I go out and fix the toilets. But no, very 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 fortunate. Interesting fun fact. My wife, she hails from Korea, and her family, and I tell you, foreign real estate investing is completely foreign, or at least in Korea, to the way we do it in the States. But her family has actually dabbled in real estate, not super big time, but they've always exchanged properties and done pretty well with it. So it was kind of in her DNA. And my family had owned a property too. Like I said, I grew up on a farm, and so it was just seemed like a natural progression. And it's been tough on her at times, some sacrifices again when maybe some of the other families are enjoying their big backyard and their lovely little brick home. We've got a tiny little yard and cramped into one side of a duplex and can hear everything the neighbors are doing next door. But it's just enabled so much for our family, our kids college. We're on track to be able to get them through school debt free, early retirement for me, hopefully here in a few years. Just and it's given us a hobby too. Like she does a lot of the tenant facing interaction. She shows the properties because I do. Another fun fact, I've maintained a day job. My passion is writing, doing the real estate on the weekends, but my job, I still have a day job. So hopefully we'll be able to move on from that in a few years. But it's just done so much for us, and she's hung in there for the past 22 years now.
That's awesome. And that speaks volumes to your guys' relationships, because my wife's also from another country. She's from Puerto Rico, and there's definitely some similarities where her family, they have properties and stuff like that. And so it's just like, once you have that partner where you align, it just makes things obviously so much easier. I mean, if it wasn't, then I'm sure you probably wouldn't be doing what you're doing. But at the same time, how do you, because you mentioned that you actually do have a job, full-time job. So how are you balancing spreadsheets and what you're doing full-time to, like, how do you manage your time?
Well, it is tough. It's you work 8, 9, 10 hours a day at your day job, then you come home, and there's always something in this passive operation. Today, for instance, so today was my day off. I'm fortunate. My employer, I get every other Friday off. But I was doing pest control at our duplexes out, so I was out in the sweltering heat spraying for bugs, and had some other did some bookkeeping on some of our properties, even the ones in Texas that are managed. I had a refrigerator that went out, so last week I'm coordinating with the Lowe's delivery guide to drop a refrigerator at a house in Texas, 900 miles away. So it's a sacrifice. Like I said earlier, the risk is to time, but the reward, the risk to reward is, we're thankful we have two very intelligent sons. They took after their mom, not me. and one got into a really great school. He's in his second year of college, and the passive income or our business, rental business is really enabling that. And so just very thankful.
That's awesome, because that's one of the things that a lot of people, I hope, realizes that they can not only set themselves up for success, but their children, or it's kind of like providing generational wealth. I want to also get your opinion on this, because a lot of people invest in obviously having Airbnbs. And what's your opinion of having Airbnb as an investment versus having long-term tenants? I mean, is that something you guys looked into, or something that you've, or like, what's your opinion on that?
So
And that might be
funny should
open Pandora's box. I'm not sure. So.
no. I would like to learn more about Airbnb. The way I'm played around in my head now is buying a lake house. So where I think that's going to play for us, and I see this actually. My dad he owned a duplex. He lived in it for 25 years or so. He owned it for about 40 in a big metropolitan area, and starting to get old and starting to have some major problems. But still, he sold it for a tremendous profit. But he did a 1031 exchange
Mm-hmm.
and avoided the capital gains and the depreciation recapture burden. So honestly, we're kind of at that stage, even though we've only been in the business since 2008, 15 years. We've got a number of properties. I'm already starting to think divestment plan. Rather pass on. I don't know that I want to pass on some of these assets. I'd rather pass it in a different form.
Right.
So coming back to the Airbnb, what I'm thinking, maybe that 1031 exchange for a duplex for a beach condo or
Right.
a lake house, and then you can either obviously get a management company, or a lot of folks will just do it themselves. And I'm kind of a chronic do-it-yourselfer, so maybe Airbnb would be a good option. And I don't think I finished the thought. My dad did that with his duplex. He at almost the age of 80.
Really?
He did a
Wow.
1031 exchange and bought a beachfront condo. I was like, what are you thinking? He doesn't even go down there very often, but he avoided the capital gains. And for your heirs, at least the way the tax law is written now, heirs don't inherit the depreciation, so the basis resets. So that's kind of in his thought process, and those are things that you can work with an estate planner. But that's where I'd see Airbnb coming in, as you maybe get away from duplexes and apartment buildings and things like that. Although you could still do it, short-term
Mhm.
rentals and stuff with an Airbnb, and get more maybe to more short-term specific properties.
Right. Yeah, because that's one of the things that my friend does. He actually, him and his brother, they bought a place. There's a lake in Idaho that's really become a kind of destination area, and that's something that he's been doing. And not only that, he's been able to benefit having that for his family, using that as a vacation property, and still not having the risk of having a long-term tenant. You could still have that passive income, but there's still obviously the risk of having people in and out. But again, if you're having some kind of management company doing that for you, that probably mitigates a lot of that risk as well. But you mentioned one of the five secrets, or the five financial truths that came from your first book spun off to your second book, which was collect rent and don't pay it, right? So how did that lead into its own separate book?
Well, again, it was just such a big part of my financial journey, our financial journey, that I just think it part of my writing journey. I love to write and love to bang out 1,000 word or 800 word blog, which takes whatever 10, 15, 20 minutes. But when you do 150 pages, 50,000 words, you really got to think about something. And
Mhm.
I just had all these thoughts about everything we've experienced in the rental property business, and I just wanted to and a lot of it's stuff that we learned the hard way, that we screwed up, and I just wanted to get it on paper. So that's just as you're thinking through writing and kind of your outline, how you want to organize your thoughts into 150 or so pages. Hey, these are the five financial truths, and these are 27 tips, and oh, by the way, here's an example of how you do it. And then let me tell you all about the rental properties. So, and again, I felt compelled that, like I said, I'm working on a book about for being frugal, that I hopefully I'll have done in about a year. With all the other stuff going on, sometimes it takes a while to sit down and bang out pages.
I have a friend that does a similar thing, where he has a newsletter, and he's able to, so now he has a following, he has a group of people where he's able to hit up and bounce ideas or get people's opinions and say, hey, what is it that you guys want to hear from me, or what. And so it's really good to have that sounding board. I'm sure you probably assume you come across that in the reviews that you get from Amazon or from other things that you review as well. So how's from hearing others kind of shaped your opinion, your process in writing?
So I do appreciate the reviews. That's I think that's I'm learning, and I'm a novice writer. I've been doing it for 4 years, so I'm learning every day.
You're
I
more
think
of
we
an
were
expert
talking.
than I'll ever be.
Well, we were talking earlier about you said you love to learn, and I definitely love to learn and learning about writing. So some things I am learning. You're right. Reviews are definitely the lifeblood, if you will, of for an author. But that being said, my number one thing is that it's therapeutic for me to get out. It's cathartic to get the word out. And then secondarily, I feel like hopefully I can give back, especially my free books for soldiers or military
Mhm.
that may be interested in those things, or friends or family of the military. And then to get out things, and just talking business and being frank here. So most writers will tell you it's not a big, huge income making endeavor. I didn't realize how much advertising was involved, and how expensive advertising can be. Even you can advertise on Amazon. So you definitely have more expenses than profits. And I'll just say, anytime you're operating a business, that can be helpful for tax purposes, when
Right.
sometimes when you're operating at a loss for at least 3 out of 5 years. So
Mhm.
it's all intertwined. But first and foremost, the biggest thing is just a passion, something I've enjoyed. Hope I'll stick to it while I can still see the screen, and my fingers still work on the keyboard. But I think I got a few more years.
No, I think you have a couple more books coming out of you.
I hope
And
so.
so what are something that the listeners can look forward to in your book about being frugal?
Well, the big thing is recognizing value, and value in goods and materials, and value in services. Going back to doing it yourself, that's a core component of being frugal. Again, if you're calling a plumber every time you need to replace the innards on your toilet tank, you're wasting about $140. And most people can do that, but that's just one example. And going back to the champagne taste on a beer budget analogy, a story I love to tell is a very young second lieutenant. I was stationed in the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg. Well, it was Fort Bragg at the time, and had a platoon party, and of course had a keg there of American. I don't even remember what it was, but
Right.
one of the mass produced American brands, and all my young soldiers, and they brought their own. They brought their and this was back in the mid '90s. They brought their own little import beers and things like that, and I just remember I was raised different. If somebody said free beer, you had me at hello,
Right.
and that's just kind of an example of how I avoid the champagne taste on a beer budget.
Yep. I, I think it's super key, is because a lot of people, I mean, my wife, she has differing opinions. She'd much rather call the plumber or not
Mhm.
rely on me so much. But I'm actually love doing that, just because that's one of the things because I also grew up on a farm, and I think that's
Mhm.
kind of where I get that, right, where it's kind of do it yourself.
If you're when you're on a farm, there may not be anybody coming,
Right.
so you better fix it
Yep.
yourself. And yeah, that's just how I was raised, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's so much for so many people. And we're fortunate that we have being blessed with the age of the internet, like you mentioned earlier, that we have pretty much all the answers on YouTube. You could look how to fix the toilet, do so many things. I've learned so many things just by learning from others, or and then you're playing that forward just because you're providing that in a book. A lot of people are still that way, where they need a book or they need to read and kind of learn that way, and because and a, that's awesome, just because a lot of people are wired that way, just because they may want the answer now, but at least they have the answer, and then they have, at least they have the knowledge to do it. There's so many things that you kind of just lose over time, just because you're not, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of thing, right?
And that's where my blog comes in, really, Leading Investing Living. And I try to kind of vary the topics, but it's more current events. A year or so ago, when we were getting our oldest son ready to go to college and the college application process, I mean, it was totally different than what it was for me 30 years ago, and just so complex. And so write about it, talk about it, and
Yeah.
share with others.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And that's something that I think all our listeners can appreciate, is because that you playing it forward and then providing that information to others. And then we're going to link all your information. You could actually order his books through his website. If you go to normspivey.com, NORMSPIV as in Victor, EY.com, and order his books through there. He also has his blog. He has tons of information, a wealth of information, and it's been good just having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
So is there anything else, any other advice or any final thoughts or advice that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Just a couple of quick things. Just don't give up on your dreams. That's I try to stress that to our kids, and probably another thing, and we've talked about it a little bit through here, but don't turn your back on the math or physics. Numbers don't lie. If you can't get the math to work, it may be time to go in a different direction. This was a great opportunity, and I really appreciate being able to come on the podcast, Dustin. And we've talked about business, about maybe how to make a buck, but you've got to stay balanced, and I've struggled with that. There was a general that I really respected, just a great leader, and he told me one time, because sometimes military folks, and especially military officers, they get balance way out of whack, and he told me, he said, on your deathbed, you're not going to think to yourself, I wished I'd spent more time at work. So, and that just resonated with me, and I try to remind myself of that when maybe you're pushing too hard or something. So gotta stay balanced.
I appreciate you mentioning that, because sometimes we expect things to come fast, and we're not. Either we overcompensate, or we don't. We need to have that balance, and whatever that balance looks like for you, it's going to be different, obviously. Typically that looks like spending time with family, or like you were saying, spending time with loved ones, doing things that are not stressful. People could look towards you as an example to see, hey, like I could do this. I can have this balance, even if it's starting a little later. It sounded like you even started a little later than you preferred, and I think that's everyone's story. I wish I would have started years earlier, or whatever it is, but it's not too late. I mean, the huge thing is having a piece of property, having your own piece of land, because that's probably the biggest investment anyone can make in their life. Because that's something that's, like I said, you're not going to make more land.
Make any more of it.
Right.
That's right.
And so, and I think I love having you on and encouraging our listeners to look and having that balance, and then providing those key fundamental things that you outline in your book. So I invite anyone that's listening to the podcast just to check out Norm's blog, check out his books. We really appreciate you, Norm, being on the podcast with us. It's been great. And let us know when you write your fifth book.
Yeah.
And when that comes out, I'd love to hear about that and get some of those principles that you're mentioning earlier, and we'll touch base then, hopefully, as well.
Sounds great, Dustin. I'd appreciate that. And thank you again for the opportunity here to talk to the Recurring Plot audience, and wish you all the best.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for listening to The Recurring Plot, presented by Curb and Turf. Curb and Turf works like Airbnb, but we help RVers to find land where they can park when they're traveling. Make more money from your land. Please visit curbandturf.com to list your property.